This is the audio version of How to Survive the Apocalypse for Native Girls by Kai Minosh Pyle. There's a glossary of words at the top of the story. You can see it on the screen right now. I recommend you take out the text version of the story. You can get it on Schoology so that you can keep the glossary open as the story continues. Thank you to Robbinsdale's Indian Education Department for helping me with pronunciation of the Ojibwe words. I am not a native speaker, so I am doing my best with their help, but I apologize for anything that is mispronounced. Without further ado, How to Survive the Apocalypse for Native Girls by Kai Minosh Pyle. 1. I'm writing this down so I don't forget. I want to be one of those 70-year-old women with their photo albums and old diaries, the ones who can recite stories from when they were children, or from even further back. Migaza used to say things like, "We are all future ancestors," all the time. I think about that a lot. 2. I started thinking about this the other day, and it occurred to me that maybe what we need is an instruction book. How to Survive the Apocalypse for Native Girls. Or, maybe, An Indigenous Futurist's Guide to Life. The first one was my idea, because that's what I am, a native girl surviving the apocalypse. That's what Migaza liked to call it. But then my kukum told me about this old movement from when she was my age. She said that long time ago, black people invented something called Afrofuturism. The Afrofuturists imagined the future, but not just any future. They imagined ways that they could get free, ways they could hold their ancestors and descendants in the same hands. And my kukum said that other indigenous people thought this was a beautiful thing, so they began calling their imaginings indigenous futurisms. My kukum said that sometimes there were border wars. Sometimes the border wars were literal. I know this because my girlfriend Shanae is black and Anishinaabe, and the nation didn't want to let her grandma in when she was little because she didn't have papers. Apparently, papers used to be very important. Migaza, who always knew about history things, even though they weren't even old, said now we have kinship instead. But I don't think Migaza always liked kinship either, because sometimes they would argue with council members about it. My kukum won't tell me, but I'm pretty sure that's why Migaza had to leave, because they argued too much. 3. Here is my first instruction. When the apocalypse happens, make sure you bring your kukum. Mine is named Alicia. She doesn't have an Anishinaabe name, because when she was born, they were only starting to get them back. You're going to want your kukum when the apocalypse happens, because kukums know everything. Mooshums do too, but they can get bossy and think they're right all the time, like the council does. Kukums secretly know that they're right all the time, but they also know that different teachings are correct. Oh, maybe I should make that another instruction. That one is important. 3.5. Different teachings are correct. My kukum says she learned this from an old lady she knew as a kid, a woman from Nigigun Simikaning, who taught her the language and also how to set snares, which is really useful after the apocalypse. My kukum named me in her honor, Nigig, after the community she came from. The woman from Nigigun Simikaning told my kukum, and lots of other people, that everyone is taught in a different way. You can't say that one teaching is the only correct one, because then you would be putting down someone else's teaching. I think this is a good instruction, but sometimes I wonder about it. Migaza told me that a long time ago, around the same time when indigenous futurism was invented, there were the skirt wars. They weren't actual wars, unlike the border wars, but people argued a lot then about whether native girls have to wear skirts to ceremony, and how two-spirit people should act during ceremony. Migazi always looked really upset by the skirt wars stories, and I don't blame them. They're two-spirit too, even though I am Ekwe-Wadizid, and they are Inine-Wadizid. I wonder if anyone ever told Migazi that they had to wear a skirt to ceremony. 4. Maybe I should start off with what I know. If someone, such as a native girl living after the apocalypse, finds this, how can I guarantee they know about what happened? Will they know about the border wars and the Hungry Years? Will they know about kinship and the council? I just realized they won't know who Migazu was. Oh. 5. I've decided that everything is too much. Also, I'm not sure that I know everything, so I will ask my kukum later. But I can tell you, the future native girl reading this, about me. I was born to the Crane clan during the Bakadeng, what people who speak English call the Hungry Years. I was born near the end of the Bakadeng, which started when my parents were young adults, after the other kinds of borders collapsed, the one they used to call the medicine line. As a kid, I used to look at all the old papers, all of them written in English, that my family had to carry around when they crossed those borders. It was my way of remembering my parents, who died when I was only a baby. Now, I travel around Anishinaabe with my kukum, with no papers needed at all. I'm 16 years old, and when I grow up, I'm going to be a storyteller like Migazu. Migazu. That's the name of my best friend. Migazu was born before me by many years, but we've been friends as long as I can remember. When I was little, Migazu used to tell me stories about two-spirit people from a long time ago. I used to think they knew every Anishinaabe two-spirit who ever lived. Migazu was the one who helped me realize that two-spirit is a thing I could be, that I could be a native girl, that I could even be a native girl who loves other girls. What a wonderful discovery. Not everyone liked Migazu as much as I did. They were the one who gave me this book, though, so I feel like I should explain about them. When Migazu got their new name, the elders decided to name them after Eagle. I don't know why they did that, but it always reminds me of this story about Eagle. You know, the one where Eagle flies around the earth every day to make sure there is at least one person putting down tobacco and being a good person. See, Migazu has this thing about them. They are trying so hard to always be a good person that it makes everyone around them want to be a better person too. 6. Here's an instruction. Love is good. Today I saw Shanae again for the first time in a few months. My kukum and I travel around so she can do ceremony for people, and also because she is the gossip of Anishinaabe Wakai, and has to know everything about everyone, so they can ask her what's going on far away in Bawitagong, or Onagaminsing, or Obishikokang. Shanae just lives in Mizkozibing all the time because she's studying with her grandma to become a doctor. Shanae's grandma is one of the best doctors because she was trained both Anishinaabe way and in one of the old universities before the borders broke down. She likes to joke that it's a good thing the apocalypse happened because that way she didn't have to pay off her student loans, which were apparently a thing that, like money, used to be a big problem for people. So I saw Shanae, and I was reminded about love. Love is part of the kinship laws. It is the kinship laws. Of course, in reality, kinship is just as much about hating each other and messing each other up as it is about loving each other. But without love, there wouldn't be any kinship at all. When I saw Shanae today, she said, "Wow, Niggy, I almost forgot how gorgeous you are." I blushed a lot, could feel the warmth in my face. Then she pulled me into her arms and kissed my nose and my cheeks and finally my mouth, and I melted. That's love. 7. I met Shanae at the Two-Spirit Youth Potluck in Mizkozibing that Migazi took me to a little while after we had the feast announcing I was a girl. She sat down in the chair next to me and gave me a little smile, and we introduced ourselves to each other. I'm from here originally, but my Kukam and I were living in Onagaminsing last year, I told her. Then I corrected myself. Well, Bawitagong a little bit too. Oh, and before that, Nogojuanong. Wow, you've been all over. Shanae smiled ruefully and sighed. I've lived here my whole life. My grandma's dad was from the south, outside Onishibawekwe. But the truth, oops, and I've always wanted to learn about other places. But the truth is, I get nervous even when I go too far outside Mizkozibing for fasting. Ah, well, that's because you're fasting. You're all alone in the woods. I reached out a hand and touched her shoulder. She blinked for a second, her face a little flushed, and I quickly pulled away, not sure what had gotten into me. I coughed and continued. Traveling can be lonely too, but when you're doing it with someone you love, that's when it's the best. As she opened her mouth to reply, Shanae was drowned out by the sound of migaze on the hand drum. Around us, everyone was circling up for a round dance. I stood up and made an awkward gesture at the crowd. You wanna? For a terrifying second, I thought she might say no. But then Shanae got up, and as she headed toward the circle, she turned just enough to grab my hand and tug me along with her. We danced every song that night, and my hand never left hers, the warmth spreading from the place where we touched throughout my whole body. We've been inseparable ever since. 8. Shanae and I talked for a long time after I got back to Miskozibing. I told her about this book that I'm writing, and she had some suggestions, so here are her ideas. Shanae's suggestion number 1. Everyone has ancestors, but not everyone knows theirs. This is very wise, I think. I know most of my ancestors going way back because of the old papers from the nation and from the government that existed before the nation, but because of the border wars, some people don't have those records, like Shanae. And some people, like Migize, don't have kukums to tell them the stories. Shanae's suggestion number 2. She thinks I should talk more about kinship. Shanae is a little bitter about kinship, like Migize, except she has even more reason to be bitter since her grandmother was originally rejected from the nation. See, when the borders broke, people decided that kinship should be our main law instead. Except the problem was that kinship means different things to different people. And sometimes people who should see each other as kin, Inowemagun, reject each other. That's what happened to Shanae's grandma, until one of the clan leaders adopted her. Shanae's suggestion number 3. You talk a lot about Migize. That's what she said. I think she means I talk too much about Migize. When she said this to me, I felt my face harden. It was the opposite of melting. What is wrong with talking about Migize? I asked her. She made an expression that was sad and disappointed and fond at the same time. Ngig, she told me, you have to move on. Talking about Migize all the time isn't going to bring them back. Migize isn't dead, I said to her. Her face became pinched, like she had bitten a lemon, a fruit I tasted once recently, which is very tart. Then she rubbed her eyes very hard, and when she looked up again I could see that there were some tears there. Migize was my best friend, but I forget sometimes that other people loved them too. Shanae took my hand in her hand and squeezed. Ngig, she said again, you have to learn to live with what is here now. You have to just be. 9. Sometimes love is not so good. When that happens, kinship can sometimes help, and sometimes it can hurt. That is what happened to Migize. I still don't know when Migize was born, but I know they came of age around the time I was born, during the Bakadeng. We call that time the hungry years, not just because people often went without enough food, but also because there was often another kind of hunger. The Kind of hunger that causes people to do terrible things. Windigo hunger. Here is a teaching about Windigoog for you. Windigoog are more than just cannibals. They're possessed by a hunger that only increases every time they try to fill it. That hunger can be for anything. Food, drugs, sex, love, but most of all, power. Migaz's parents were the kind of people who were infected by the Windigo spirit of the Bakadang. Migaza never talked about it, not even with me, but they had scars on their hands and arms like burn marks. They wore long sleeves to cover them most days, but they stood out if you noticed them, still faintly redder than the brown of Migaza's skin. Once, when I first met Migaza, I asked them where they grew up. Migaza's eyes went a little blurry, like they were looking far into the distance. Their breath turned shallow, and their whole body tensed. They reminded me of how deer react when they spot you in the woods with a gun. I stood still, as though my own sudden moves might scare Migaza just like one of those deer. A place that doesn't exist anymore, Migaza said finally, their breath starting to deepen again. Where did it go? I asked. I was just a kid, and didn't know how to read the words in Migaza's face. For a long moment, I didn't think Migaza was going to answer me. They were still staring ahead, not looking at me, their lips held tightly shut. But then they said, very quietly, it was consumed by Windigoog, and they refused to say anything else. It wasn't until I began to realize that I was not the boy everyone thought I was that Migaza told me more. When I told them I was going to talk to my kukum to see if we could have a feast for me being a girl, Migaza's jaw became tense, and they were silent for a moment. Ngig, they said to me, I'm going to tell you something, and I don't want to scare you, but it's something you should know about. Which made me scared just on principle. But then Migaza told me. They told me how they had asked their parents as a young teenager if they could cut their hair and ask an elder for a new name, one that didn't end in Kwe. They told me about how their mother had cried and their father had screamed, how they had left in the dead of night. They told me how the people they had grown up with, their close and extended kin, had one by one shut their doors in Migaza's face, even though it was winter in Anishinabekwe. I survived that night, Migaza said slowly. I went west to Mizkozibing, found another two-spirit who showed me safe places to sleep. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Migaza reached out suddenly, wrapped an arm around me, and smooshed me against their shoulder. I just want you to know, Ngig. I want you to know that for some people, Inawemagun doesn't include people like me and you. I didn't want to understand then, but the kinship laws! I could feel Migaza shake their head. Kinship is a two-sided coin, Ngig. You always gotta ask yourself, who is being excluded here? 10. Instruction inspired by today. Watch those in power carefully. That is what my kukum always tells me when she makes me attend council, even though I'm not old enough to participate yet. I've been going since I was little. That's where I first saw Migaza, actually. They were arguing with the council, of course, even back then when they were just my age. Today, Shanae, her grandma, my kukum, and I all went to the Western Door Council meeting. It was my first time at council without Migaza, and I tried not to think about that too hard. Shanae's grandma gave a report on the situation in the Miskozibing hospital, and a lot of people frowned while listening. Shanae's hand gripped mine tightly the entire time. I didn't miss the looks a few people gave Shanae and her grandma when they walked in. A little tension in the room flowed out when Shanae's grandma started talking. She is one of the few people of my kukum's generation who grew up speaking Anishinaabe Moan, and her accent is flawless. Still, my other hand, the one not holding Shanae's, curled around the edge of my seat until my knuckles started to hurt. The news about the hospital wasn't so good. One of the council members, a woman from Eagle Clan, stood up after Shanae's grandma. Her voice filled the room without even shouting. "Perhaps supplies wouldn't be so low," she said, looking straight at Shanae's grandmother, "if you weren't treating every single stranger who comes to your door." There were quiet gasps, but just as many people seemed to be nodding. The word she used for stranger was mayagazid, someone who was not kin. Shanae's grandma looked right back at her and said in her forever steady voice, "Since it was established, the Mizkozibing Hospital has always made it our policy to treat all who need our services, whether they are Inawemagan or Mayagizid." The Eagle Woman's face was stormy. "Policy it may be." Her tone was slow, deliberate, and a little vicious. "But all must still abide by the laws of kinship within Anishinaabewaki. "Kinship does not exclude kindness towards strangers," my Kukum said loudly, standing up next to Shanae's grandma. The Eagle Clan woman's frown deepened. I think she realized she was facing two respected women who were her elders, and that the very kinship laws she was arguing for insisted she defer to them. She sat down hard and began whispering furiously to the council members next to her. My Kukum leaned over then and said very low in my ear the instruction that I just shared. "Watch those in power carefully." That's why I wrote this down. And my Kukum was right, because writing it down made me remember that Migaza was from Eagle Clan, and the woman who argued with Shanae's grandma was the one in charge of their fate. 11. Sometimes, when it's the apocalypse, you have to just do things for yourself. My Kukum won't tell me about what happened to Migaza. When I ask, she gets a very pained expression on her face and refuses to speak about it. But once I saw the Eagle Clan woman and the way she talked to my Kukum and Shanae's grandma, I knew what I had to do. After the council meeting was over, I told Shanae and my Kukum that I was going to the bathroom. I followed the Eagle Clan woman out of the council chamber and into a back hallway. I guess I wasn't great at being sneaky, because as soon as I shut the door, as quietly as I possibly could, she turned around and put her hands on her hips. "Well?" My tongue felt thick and knotted. She took this as a sign to start talking. "You want to give me a lecture too, like those relatives of yours?" She snorted, and anger started to get hot inside me at her condescending tone. My fingers pressed into my palms, and I could feel my nails leaving little marks in my flesh. "Please, I have better things to do than listen to a child's righteousness." And she started to turn away. "Wait," I finally said. "Wait!" She kept walking. "I just want to know what happened to Migaza." The Eagle Clan woman stopped dead. She turned back around to face me slowly. Then she walked right up to me and bent down until her face was inches from mine. "What did you say?" I swallowed the dryness in my throat. "Migaza, my friend. I want to know what happened to them." There was a funny glint to her eyes as she studied my face. "That's right. They did have a little pet, didn't they?" She smiled, sweet and slimy. "Migaza is gone, child." "You can't exile someone just because you don't like them," I said hotly. Kinship is exactly the reason why that freak had to be gotten rid of," she spat. "Do you even know what they did?" I blinked, and the woman's eerie smile came back. "You don't, do you? Ah, Migaza. They were always trying to pick a fight over the kinship laws. I wondered for a long time why they were so hostile about that. But then when you've murdered your entire family, I guess your only hope is to overthrow the norms of kinship. I stood there, slack-jawed. What? The Eagle Clan woman pulled back from me a bit, looking ever more satisfied. You heard me. Migizis slaughtered their own Inuwamaganag, set their own house on fire, left the entire village to burn, and ran like a coward. There was nothing I wanted in that moment more than to get as far away from the Eagle Clan woman as I could and never see her again. But my entire body had become too heavy to move. You're lying! Look, I'm sorry. She shook her head. That grandmother of yours should never have let them come near you. But I promise you, Migize is gone by now. In Anishinaabemowin, the word Maja can mean two things. Usually it means someone has left, gone somewhere else. But other times it means, they're dead, child. No one survives long outside the protective network of the nation. She grimaced. Why do you think so many Mayagizig want to come here anyway? I was shaking all over by then. My mouth wouldn't work properly. After a minute of waiting, the Eagle Clan woman shook her head again, muttered to herself, and walked away. I watched her go all the way down the hallway before I felt like I could move again. 12. I always knew terrible things had happened during the Bakadang, and before, during the border wars, and even before that, when powerful states ruled the world. My kukum would sometimes go fuzzy when she talked about it, would get tears in her eyes, or shaky hands. Especially when I was little, these moods scared me, and I would try to comfort her with a rabbit stew or a funny story. It was only as I got older that I realized there's only so much you can do to help. Shanae whispered to me once that when she grew up, she wanted to specialize in medicine for people whose minds and hearts were in pain, like my kukum and Migize. Maybe someday she will invent just the right combination of food and laughter to cure sadness.